I stayed at an Airbnb about 3 years ago, without any specific occasion in mind. It was more of a weekend getaway to take some time off from work. The Airbnb was a cabin located 4 hours away from my hometown. The cabin appeared quite isolated, with only 3 or 4 other cabins within a mile radius and the woods right in the backyard. This was exactly what I was looking for, and I was super excited when I arrived. Early in the morning, I explored the property and enjoyed some of the cool features. In the afternoon, I sat outside on the back patio on one of those swinging chairs. As I looked out into the distance, I noticed a man walking in the woods. He seemed like a regular guy, and I assumed he was probably staying in one of the nearby cabins. He walked deeper into the woods until he was out of sight, and I continued to enjoy nature. I stayed outside for almost an hour before going inside to make dinner and then settling down to watch a movie. At the end of the night, during the movie, the doorbell rang. I didn't even know the cabin had a doorbell, but I went up and answered the front door. To my surprise, the man standing on the porch was the same person I had seen earlier in the woods. "How can I help you?" I asked. The man smiled widely and explained that he had been lost for a few hours and needed help getting back to his cabin. I hesitated for a moment, sensing something strange about him, but couldn't quite figure it out. "Yeah, let me get my phone and you can search the address," I said. I closed the door, went over to the couch, picked up my phone, and returned to the door. However, when I opened it, he was gone. Nowhere on my porch or in the front yard. Feeling uneasy, I stood in the doorway for a second, then closed the door and went back to the couch. I stayed cautious for a while, but eventually went to bed and surprisingly slept well. In the morning, as I went outside on the back porch to drink my coffee, just 10 minutes later, I saw the man from yesterday walking in the woods, seemingly on the same path. Now, I was sure he wasn't lost, but I wondered why he had come up to my cabin. I went back inside, called one of my friends to share this weird situation, and as we talked, I heard the doorbell again. I whispered to my friend and left the phone call going while I answered the door. "Do you need something?" I asked. The man smiled and repeated the same story about being lost and needing help. Annoyed and confused, I slammed the door shut and updated my friend, who urged me to leave right away. Agreeing, I hurried to pack my bags, checked the peephole to make sure the guy had left, and went out to my car. As I started backing out, the man appeared in the front window, standing inside the house, watching me drive away. When I got home, I contacted the Airbnb owner and informed them about this intruder. However, their response was short, and they didn't seem worried, merely apologizing for my dislike of the stay. The man's intentions remained a mystery, but seeing him inside the house just 30 seconds after I left was the most horrifying and creepy thing I'd ever seen. Over the years, I've explored various trails in the nearby mountains, often accompanied by my best friend, who lives just a few miles away. Our tradition involves planning a significant trail each year in the fall, ranging from a few days to an entire week of backpacking and camping. In 2019, we set our sights on a trail across the range, leading to a small lake at the mountain summit. Unfortunately, days before the trip, my friend had to cancel due to a work emergency. Determined to make the most of my pre-planned week off, I decided to embark on the journey alone. On a Monday morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead to begin my route. This wasn't your typical recreational trail. These backpacking trails lack defined paths, requiring the use of maps, compasses, and landmarks for navigation. Typically, one would aim for a distant landmark, such as a specific rock formation, hike toward it, and repeat the process. The initial 2 days were spent hiking towards a ridge in the mountains. As darkness fell on the second day, I set up camp several hours away from reaching the ridge. I pitched my tent, built a fire, and heated up some food. Around 8 o'clock, with the sun already set, I settled into my tent to rest and read, leaving the fire burning. Approximately 20 minutes into reading, amidst the crackling fire, I heard a distinct sound of a stick snapping right behind my tent. Alarmed, I jolted up, considering the possibility of a black bear attracted by the earlier cooked food. However, no further sounds followed. Despite shining a flashlight into the tree line and calling out aggressively, there was no evidence of any creatures or predators. The distinct stick snapping puzzled me, as if something had stepped on it. After a while outside, I put out the fire and retreated into the tent. Sleep proved elusive that night, as I remained vigilant, listening for any more sounds. Come morning, I packed up and continued until reaching the ridge. From there, it was a straightforward hike to the lake, and I quickened my pace to get there before nightfall. Arriving with an hour to spare before sunset, the lake's beauty justified the arduous hike. Sitting by the fire, I kept hearing soft noises resembling footsteps from the trees behind me. Despite the darkness hindering visibility, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. An hour later, I entered my tent and lay down. Periodically, I heard footsteps, barely audible, and eventually fell asleep. Suddenly, I awoke to the sound of someone running away. Hastily grabbing my flashlight, I rushed outside and saw a figure disappearing in the distance. Heart pounding, I discovered footprints around my tent, indicating someone had been walking around, searching the campsite. Desperate to see better, I tried to reignite the campfire. Terrified, with no one to turn to, I spent the night by the fire, remaining alert but witnessing no further signs of intrusion. Come morning, I captured a few pictures of the lake and began the hike back. Despite originally planning to stay a full day, an uncomfortable feeling of being followed compelled me to return swiftly. Along the journey, I noticed missing items from my backpack, small things like food and tools. However, my bag remained with me. To this day, I wonder if the person outside my tent that night had snuck inside and stolen from my bag while I slept, a chilling thought that still sends shivers down my spine. My roommate was away for the week, leaving me with the entire place to myself during spring break, with no college classes to attend. On Monday, a massive storm swept through our city, a common occurrence during this time of year, making everything seem more intense. The trees appeared as if they might be blown away, and the house continuously shook and creaked. Anticipating that sleep would be elusive, I decided to stay awake. I powered up the Xbox and immersed myself in one of my video games, playing until around 11 o'clock when the doorbell unexpectedly rang. I paused the game, hesitated for a moment due to the storm, and then approached the front door cautiously, peering through the peephole. Nothing. Opening the door exposed me to the fierce wind and rain, but there was no one in sight. I dismissed it, attributing the doorbell ring to the forceful wind, a thought that seems foolish now, but what else could I have assumed? Returning to my game, only a couple of minutes later, a loud crash echoed from the backyard, patio furniture tumbling and breaking. Realizing what had happened, I rushed to the back door to find everything scattered in the yard, propelled by the gusty wind. Hastily, I put on my shoes and went outside, securing each piece of furniture against the back of the house. The wind and rain were relentless, occasionally stinging my face. As I worked, I spotted someone standing at the edge of the backyard, watching me. I glanced back for a moment, then grabbed the last piece of furniture and retreated inside to escape the rain. Peering out later, the person had vanished. Between the mysterious doorbell and this encounter, nervousness crept in, prompting me to sit in the living room, scrolling on my phone to avoid further interruptions. After a while, fatigue overcame me. I grabbed a blanket and settled on the couch. Unwilling to go upstairs where the storm's intensity was amplified, I eventually succumbed to sleep. Hours later, in the dead of night, a sudden burst of heavy wind shook the house, waking me abruptly. Preparing to check on the outdoor furniture, I swung my feet to the floor, only to realize they were soaked. I looked down and saw puddles leading across the floor, each containing faint, muddy shoe prints. Alarmed, I jumped up and ran to the corner of the room, heart pounding, In the silence, broken only by the howling wind outside, I cautiously followed the shoe prints throughout the house, leading me upstairs and downstairs. It was evident they entered through the back door, which I had forgotten to lock in my rush to secure the patio furniture from the rain. After locking the door, I reached for my phone to dial 911, but a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if they were still inside? Opting for silence, I retreated to the most concealed corner of the house and made the call, waiting anxiously for their arrival. Upon inspecting the scene, the authorities found nothing missing, deeming it a potential personal attack focused on my house. Strangely, the intruder had approached me while I slept, seemingly doing nothing but watching. This unsettling realization led me to believe they might have been targeting my roommate. Having seen me, they surveyed the entire house and left without any tangible actions. If this was indeed a personal attack and my roommate had been present, the situation could have escalated significantly. Last year, I took on the responsibility of house-sitting for one of my close friends while they embarked on a 2-week-long business trip. Their home, with a collection of lizards, fish, and numerous houseplants, was a step up from my apartment, making the task all the more enjoyable. The first week passed smoothly, resembling a comfortable stay at an Airbnb. However, one night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I heard a man cough just outside the house. The proximity right by the back door startled me. Swiftly, I switched on the outdoor lights, signaling my presence. After waiting a minute, I looked out the window, only to find the person had disappeared. The incident left me unsettled, questioning the stranger's motives. Remaining cautious, I decided to grab some food a little past 7. Yet, as I stepped outside, I noticed footprints in the yard, creating a clear path. Intrigued, I followed the trail from the sidewalk to the back of the house and back to the sidewalk. Although I couldn't fathom a purpose for this strange behavior, I dismissed it, going out to pick up food. Upon my return, I searched for more footprints but found none. Inside, I settled to watch TV but was interrupted by someone walking through the front yard. Alert. Now I listened as they approached the front and then back doors. The sounds intensified, suggesting an attempt to open the back door. Rushing to the top of the stairs, I illuminated the downstairs lights, causing the person to pause. Peering down, I saw no one at the back door, but moments later, a window shattered and chaos erupted as the intruder vandalized the living space. Panicking, I called the police, fearing they wouldn't arrive in time. The assailant, after wreaking havoc downstairs, ascended the stairs, continuing the destruction in a spare bedroom. Eventually, he reached the room I was in, attempting to break down the locked door. Panels flew off, allowing him entry. Wearing a face mask and hoodie, armed with a metal baseball bat, he looked at me in rage, but then inexplicably turned away, demolishing the room without acknowledging my presence. After ravaging the entire floor, he exited the house. Frozen in place, I awaited the arrival of the police. The next day, my friend returned to confront the aftermath. The house was in shambles, yet nothing had been stolen. The police speculated that the attacker likely knew my friend and harbored some grudge, though she couldn't identify anyone with a motive for such brutality. My attempt to describe the man proved futile, as he remained fully covered. The most haunting aspect was his indifference to my presence. To this day, the mysterious intruder hasn't returned, and his motive remains elusive. This incident occurred to me last year when I was working at a gas station. While I understand it's a common setting for such stories, when you're actually in that position, you never anticipate anything like this happening to you. It was a rainy night, not heavily, but enough to make it uncomfortable to be outside without any covering. During such weather, there are usually fewer customers in the convenience store for snacks or gas transactions. My job mainly involved being present, occasionally walking around the store to stretch my legs and stay awake, but most of the time, I'd be on my phone. While scrolling through my social media feeds, I heard an odd noise from outside, like someone tapping on the glass door. Looking up, I saw a figure in the rain, a man with his face concealed by the hood of his jacket. I waved, indicating he could enter, as the door wasn't locked. Strangely, he continued tapping on the door as if he didn't see me. I walked over, pulled the door open, and greeted him. Without acknowledging me, he walked past and approached the counter. It struck me as comical how oblivious he seemed. He requested a pack of cigarettes, paid with cash, walked out, and that's when I noticed no cars in the parking area or by the gas pumps. The man walked away, unfazed by the rain. It would have made more sense if he had bought a gas container, suggesting car trouble, but he left with just a pack of smokes. That odd encounter lingered in my mind for the next hour. I couldn't come up with a logical explanation, and I continued stocking items to pass the time. While doing so, I heard tapping on the door again. I walked around the aisle and saw the same man standing outside. Opening the door, I asked if he was okay, offering assistance. He didn't respond, but mentioned something about down the road. I tried looking but saw nothing until I noticed a gas container by one of the pumps. Pointing at it, he said, "Help." And that's when I realized he probably didn't speak much English. Agreeing, I walked out with him. He handed me a credit card and I started pumping gas into the container. Uncomfortably, the man stood behind me, attempting to stay out of view. Once the container was full, I handed it over and began walking back, but he stopped me, grabbing my arm. Speaking rapidly in a language I couldn't understand, he yelled something as if talking to someone else. As I reached the door, I saw a man on the other side of the counter hastily packing things into his backpack. He looked up, jumped over the counter, and everything went black. I woke up on the floor with a massive headache. Only a couple of minutes had passed since the incident, and I realized that the man behind me had hit me over the head to aid his accomplice's escape. The police were called, and I was taken to the hospital, but thankfully I only suffered a concussion and needed a few stitches. The most challenging part was the embarrassment I felt afterward, realizing I had been played so easily. However, in retrospect, I'm grateful I blacked out before anything worse happened. The CCTV footage revealed the intruder inside the store holding a gun. Had I tried to intervene or shown any sign of resistance, the outcome could have been much more severe. I'm a 31-year-old female, and this incident occurred when I was 29 in 2020. My friend, whom I'll refer to as Stacy, informed me that her friend, let's call her Brienne, needed a dog sitter for her husky named Bear, while she and her husband went on vacation to California. Stacy knew about my dog-sitting experience through the Rover app, where you house-sit for strangers' dogs. The offer was enticing, $200 for 5 days of dog-sitting. Seemed like a great opportunity to earn some extra cash, so I agreed. A week before the dog-sitting gig, Brienne showed me around her house, introducing me to Bear, her sizable husky. The house had a secure front door with a code lock, adding an extra layer of safety. Brienne was generous, mentioning that I could help myself to any food in the house. When the day arrived, I showed up on a Friday night, shortly after Brienne and her husband departed for California. The initial 2 days were uneventful, with me working during the afternoons, taking breaks to feed Bear, going on car rides, watching movies, and enjoying the company of the husky. On a Monday night after work, I heard a knock at the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man in what appeared to be a black police uniform. It struck me as odd, but I opened the door to inquire. He asked for someone named George, a name unfamiliar to me. I mentioned that I was dog-sitting for a friend and had been there since Friday. In hindsight, it wasn't wise to reveal that I was alone to a stranger. The man left after a brief conversation, and I locked the door, feeling slightly uneasy. When I informed Brienne, she dismissed it, saying, "Oh, don't worry about it." Everything seemed normal until Wednesday night when I went to bed at midnight. An inexplicable urge prompted me to check if the front door was locked. Thankfully, it was. but an unsettling feeling lingered. I fell asleep and woke up at 3:05 a.m. to Bear barking frantically. Concerned someone had broken in, I rushed to the living room to find Bear growling and barking at the front door. Looking through the peephole, I spotted the same guy, now accompanied by another person, both dressed in security guard uniforms. Feeling alarmed, I refrained from opening the door this time. It was unsettling that the same person returned when he knew I was alone. Making sure all doors were locked, I observed the men walking away. I didn't notice any security vehicles nearby. I have to credit Bear. His barking likely deterred them. Although creeped out, I didn't inform Brienne, considering she was in California. I stayed one more night after that, but haven't returned for dog sitting since, remaining unaware of who those individuals were or their intentions. In the past year, I embarked on an extensive 10-day road trip, covering a loop that included visits to 5 or 6 different cities. Unlike conventional journeys, my route wasn't fixed, and I opted not to pre-book hotels due to uncertainties regarding the duration in each city and my break locations. Instead, I relied on hotels that accepted walk-ins. During the initial 5 nights, finding suitable hotels along my route was smooth. However, on the 6th night, I encountered a challenge. Driving between cities, fatigue set in around 11 p.m. Though I initially aimed to reach the next major city and rest in a parking lot, the overwhelming drowsiness made it impossible. I pulled over and reached out to prominent hotels along my route, yet none were accommodating walk-ins at that hour. Growing anxious, the possibility of having to park on the side of the road and sleep became a looming danger. Fortunately, a sign for a hotel appeared 10 miles ahead. Upon reaching the building, I parked at the front. The hotel resembled more of a motel, a single-story structure with multiple rooms. The parking lot had a few cars, but it was mostly empty. Approaching the reception desk, I inquired about a room. Luckily, one was available, and the woman at the desk provided me with a key card. I retrieved my bag from the car and headed to the room. Despite its outdated appearance, the room was acceptable given the price. Within a minute of entering, a knock echoed at the door. Opening it slightly, I encountered a man mumbling to himself. Upon seeing the door ajar, he attempted to force himself in while continuing his incoherent muttering. Swiftly, I extended my arm to block him, preventing full entry. Ceasing his speech, he glanced up at me as I instructed him to leave. After a brief pause, he turned and walked away. Ensuring his departure, I locked the door. It was an odd encounter, but I didn't feel excessively threatened, attributing it to a lost and possibly drugged-up individual. After another 15 minutes, I drifted into sleep. In the middle of the night, a knock jolted me awake. Expecting the man from earlier, I wisely secured the chain bolt before partially opening the door. This precaution proved crucial, as the moment I unlocked the door, the man forcefully rammed into it, spouting nonsensical sentences. Reacting swiftly, I retreated and dialed 911. Undeterred, the man persisted, relentlessly banging on the door in an attempt to break in. Amidst the chaos, he thrust a knife between the door, attempting to cut the chain. Although the chain held, the realization that he possessed a knife was profoundly unsettling. The tumultuous episode of yelling, banging, and attempted break-in persisted for several minutes before abruptly ceasing. Police arrived later, but the man had vanished. The motives behind his actions remained unclear, but it was evident that he harbored malicious intent. Whether influenced by drugs or other factors, the experience underscored the vulnerability inherent in situations where a wrong move could be exploited. While I don't believe he targeted me personally, an unsettling feeling of being watched occasionally lingers. I moved across the state to a newly built house. My previous landlord decided he wanted to sell his house, so when our lease agreement was up, he kicked me out. I decided to lease this new house, but I was honestly really excited for this place. As soon as I moved in, though, I noticed my neighbor across the street staring at me several times within the first couple of days. He was a middle-aged man, but didn't seem to ever be away from his house. I tried to brush it off, assuming that maybe he was just curious about the new person in the neighborhood. But the more I saw him, the more I realized there was something off about him. He never spoke to anyone, he never smiled, and he never left. He just stayed in his house watching. I would catch glimpses of him through my window and see him standing in his driveway at odd hours of the night. It was starting to freak me out. One night, as I was settling in for bed, I heard a noise outside. It was a scraping sound, like someone dragging a heavy object across the ground. I peeked out the window, and there was my neighbor dragging what looked like a large ladder across his lawn. It was really late, and I had no idea why he would be needing to do any work on his house at this time. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid because I was in a new place, surrounded by new people, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about my neighbor. I tried to calm myself and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I saw him outside again. This time, he was standing at the end of my driveway, staring at me through my window. I pulled the curtain shut and tried to ignore him, but the feeling of him watching me gave me chills. I didn't like that he was by my driveway either, so I quickly got into my car and pulled out of the garage. He was back in his yard by then, but he watched me as I drove away. Things grew a lot worse from here. One night, as I lay in bed, I could clearly hear someone walking in the grass in my backyard, which was fenced in. I got up and looked out the window, but the footsteps stopped. I waited in my bed for probably 30 minutes, but I didn't hear any more footsteps. I got up and checked the window one more time to be safe, and far back in the yard was a figure. It was hard to make them out because it was so dark, but there was definitely someone standing there watching me. I backed away and called the police, but the man had left before they arrived. I told them all about my creepy neighbor, but they told me there was no evidence of any wrongdoing, and that my neighbor had never been in trouble with the law. I was basically on my own unless something more serious actually happened. I started to take precautions, locking my doors and windows, and avoiding being outside as much as possible. Even then, I didn't feel much safer. I'd been at the new house for almost 2 weeks at this point, and even thought about breaking my lease agreement. Then something happened. I got home from work late and pretty much went straight to bed. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of something thudding against the side of the house. It sounded like it was right up against the wall outside my bedroom, which was on the second-story floor of my house. I slowly got out of bed, heart racing in my chest, and pulled the curtains back from my window. I jumped back and screamed, seeing my neighbor's face staring at me from just inches away from my window. He was standing on a ladder, trying to look into my bedroom. He quickly climbed down and ran away. I called the police again, and just a few minutes later, they caught him trying to get the ladder down. While he didn't admit to what he was doing, it was very obvious. In the following days, one of my neighbors came by and explained that they had some weird encounters with that neighbor guy as well. They said they saw him looking through their windows as they were coming home from work one day. Part of me wonders if they could have prevented this whole thing from happening to me if they had just reported the guy, but either way, it's over now. I lived with my older brother for about 4 years after I finished school. We shared rent on an apartment together since neither of us could afford anything on our own. But during the 4th year, my brother started making better money, and he planned to move out once the lease came to an end. I wasn't making a lot, so I knew I couldn't afford to pay for the apartment alone. I looked around online for a roommate for a few months, but decided to just move out as well and find a cheaper place. I searched up until the last month of our lease at the apartment. My brother had basically moved everything out already, and there was a lot of pressure on me to find somewhere quick. With my extremely low budget, it wasn't easy. Eventually, though, I stumbled across a listing posted by a homeowner renting out a room in their house. The man's name was Evan. I sent him a text to let him know I was interested and kept searching. A few minutes later, he responded. We scheduled a time to call later in the day, and when we did, he explained all the details. He said he lived alone in the house and was renting out his spare bedroom, but I'd be able to use all the other rooms in the house too. Sounded great to me, so I agreed to it. A couple of weeks later, I tossed everything in a U-Haul and drove down to the house. Between this time, we'd been texting and calling, and he sent me a bunch of pictures of the house, but I hadn't had the chance to view it in person yet. I got there around noon, parking in the driveway. The house was definitely small, but it looked nice from the outside. Evan was standing in the garage waving me over. He gave me a quick tour, then helped me unload all of my stuff into my room. Evan seemed like a regular man in his mid-30s, which was almost 10 years older than me, but I didn't really mind. He didn't hold conversations very well, though, and was somewhat shy. Anyway, we finished moving everything inside, and I dropped the U-Haul off. I Ubered back to the house, and by then, it was almost 8 p.m., and I was really tired. Evan was on the couch watching TV, so I told him I was going to bed early, and I went to my room. Evan seemed like a regular man in his mid-30s, which was almost 10 years older than me, but I didn't really mind. He didn't hold conversations very well, though, and was somewhat shy. Anyway, we finished moving everything inside, and I dropped the U-Haul off. I Ubered back to the house, and by then, it was almost 8 p.m., and I was really tired. Evan was on the couch watching TV, so I told him I was going to bed early, and I went to my room. All in all, it seemed like a decent place, and I was happy with it. I unpacked some more, then set up my bed, and by 9 o'clock I was finally ready to sleep. I walked over to my door to lock it and turn off the lights, but as I reached my hand out, I saw the knob on the door was empty, as in there was no lock on it. Confused, I opened the door. The lock was on the outside of the door. I stepped into the living room and asked Evan why the bedroom door locked from the outside. He looked confused and said he never noticed that, but he would switch it around tomorrow. I shrugged and said okay, then went back to my room. I was tired and not too worried about it, but it was definitely an odd find. I got in bed and fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up and I heard someone moving around in the kitchen, which I assumed was just Evan getting water or something, so I closed my eyes again. A minute later, I heard him walking back down the hallway, but as he was passing my room, he stopped. I opened my eyes and looked at the door. He was standing out there quietly for maybe 15 seconds before I heard a click. He locked my door. My stomach dropped, and I felt my face go cold as Evan walked down to his room. As soon as I heard his bedroom door shut, I got up quietly and went over to the door. I tried the handle, and it wouldn't budge. I stood in shock for a few seconds, coming to reality that this man I just met has now locked me in a room. My fear started to turn into anger. I called out for Evan, telling him to open the door. It only took a second before I heard Evan run out of his room and over to my door. I heard him place his hand on the door, but he paused for a few seconds before he unlocked it. I swung the door open right away. What the expletive was that? I confronted him. Evan was stumbling words out, saying he just wanted to make sure he was safe because he didn't know me. I understood that concern, but locking someone in a room was not a smart way to go about it. I told him that I was going to pack up and leave in the morning, and I stayed up all night on the couch in the living room, waiting for the U-Haul store to open at 9 o'clock. I looked into the hallway, seeing Evan's bedroom door was still closed, hopefully meaning he was still asleep. Then I drove straight there and drove the U-Haul back to the house. When I went inside, though, Evan's bedroom door was open. "Evan," I called out. I walked over to his room and peeked my head inside. His room was empty. I moved my eyes around the room in disbelief. Things were only getting weirder. I backed out and got straight to moving my stuff. I powered through 2 hours of moving boxes and taking apart my bed. I only had 2 boxes left. I ran inside and picked up another, then rushed to the front door until Evan appeared in the doorway. "Move," I said. He stared at me, emotionless. After a few seconds, he stepped aside. I hurried past him and shoved the box in the U-Haul. The last box was half full of random food I kept from my old pantry at the apartment. I decided to just leave it. Evan was freaking me out, and I wanted to get away from him as soon as possible. I started closing the back of the U-Haul before Evan interrupted. "You forgot this." He held out the last box. "Oh, yeah, thanks." I grabbed it from him and climbed back in the truck. I felt him watching me as I stacked the box, and when I turned, he had his hand on the door. He started pulling it down, trying to close me in. I was able to stop him before the door was even halfway down. I shoved him on the ground, but he got up and ran, not in the house but off into the trees away from the house. I didn't know what to think, but I didn't care. I quickly shut the back door and drove away. My brother was nice enough to let me stay with him until I found a new place. I don't know what happened at that house or what would have happened, but there was definitely something very wrong going on. I'm a receptionist at a local hotel, and most of my shifts are overnight. I'm in charge of the front desk, and my main responsibilities are to check in guests, answer phone calls, and keep an eye on the security cameras. It's usually a pretty quiet job since our hotel isn't the biggest or busiest. This night, the hotel was mostly empty, with only a few guests staying with us. I was sitting at the front desk on my phone when I saw a man start walking towards the doors outside. I stood up and greeted him when he came inside. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and said, "I need a room for the night." He was definitely high on something, but regardless, I checked him in and gave him a key to his room. It was standard to allow walk-in bookings when the hotel was less than 75% full. He started walking toward the elevators, and I sat back down and pulled my phone out. A few hours later, I was sitting at the front desk when I heard a noise coming from the hallway. It was a thump sound, like a door trying to be forced open. I got up and walked around the corner to the end of the hallway. The man I checked in a few hours ago was standing there trying to open up one of our maintenance doors. "Can I help you find something?" I asked. He looked over at me with those creepy eyes. I asked again, but he just stared at me. I wasn't really sure what to think. Maybe he was really high and looking for the vending machine or something. I don't know. I didn't want to anger the man though, so I went back to my desk and forgot about it. A good amount of time passed with no activity, no sounds from any of the rooms, nobody entering the building or walking through the halls. It was around 3 in the morning, and I did a small walk around the bottom floor just to keep myself awake and busy. As I got to it was very quiet now, which made me somewhat nervous. I walked down the hall hearing nothing, but when I reached the end, one of the room's doors was open. I listened again for a second before lightly knocking. Nobody responded. I cautiously peeked inside, unsure of what to expect. It seemed empty. I wasn't comfortable walking all the way inside though, so I couldn't really look around, but I was sure nobody was inside. I closed the door and looked at the room number, 112. That was the room I'd given to the man. I never saw him exit the building though. I quickly walked back down to the front desk. I looked at all the security cameras we had in the lobby and outside the building, but the man didn't turn up. I jumped. It was the hotel phone. One of the rooms was calling. I picked it up. "Hello, how can I help you?" There was a woman on the line, telling me about some man knocking on her door in the middle of the night. I apologized and assured her I would take care of it. I hung up and took a deep breath. I was getting really nervous now. I walked around the desk, but then again, the phone started ringing. It was someone else from a different room this time, saying he had the same experience as the other woman, someone knocking at his door in the middle of the night. I called the police right away. I stood by the front doors until they arrived, just in case I needed a quick escape. Luckily, they came before anything happened, but they didn't find the man. Instead, they found a broken window in his room where he likely jumped out. It was on the second story though, so I'm not sure how he managed to get away without some major injuries. Later, while the police were still searching, They got a report that the car he used to pay for the room was stolen. It's unclear what the man intended to do or why he was knocking on people's doors. I'm thankful none of them opened their doors, though, because this case could have been much worse if they had. This incident occurred a couple of years ago, shortly after I rented and moved into a new house. The first week went by quickly with no issues at all. I unpacked, bought some new furniture, and got everything set up the way I wanted. The main reason I moved there was because of my work-from-home job, and having a quiet place to work was crucial. The house was far from others, providing a peaceful work environment. One morning, after making breakfast and sitting down to work, I got a knock at the front door. I walked over and answered it, finding my landlord smiling and asking how I was doing. "Yeah, I'm doing good, thank you," I said, still unsure why he was here. We made small talk for a minute before he mentioned he was just checking in on me, and then he left. I went back to work, but the encounter felt strange. The rest of the day went by without any notable events. After dinner, I decided to take a walk around my street. The houses in the neighborhood were well spread out, and I hadn't seen the other houses yet. As I rounded the corner toward my house, I noticed a car parked on the side of the street. It wasn't directly in front of my house, but there weren't any other houses near me. Upon closer inspection, I realized it was the same car my landlord had when he showed me the house, but there was nobody in it. I hurried up the driveway and went inside, looking out the windows to see if he was in the yard. After a while, I stopped looking because I wasn't seeing anything. Another hour or so went by until I heard a knock on the front door. Looking through the peephole, I saw it was my landlord again. Sighing in annoyance, I opened the door and he was smiling, asking how I was doing. "Yeah, I'm still good, thanks. Can you just make sure to let me know when you plan on dropping by next time, though?" I said politely. He apologized, and I said I had to get back to work. Something about that interaction, the way he talked and looked at me, felt creepy. I went to bed thinking of the best way to tell him I wanted to be left alone. He was my landlord, and this was technically his house, but there are rules they have to follow when renting it out. I fell asleep, still unsure of what to do. I heard him coming back up as I rushed out of the house and into my car, driving away. I called the police as I drove to a parking lot nearby. What happened after this still bothers me every day. My landlord was still there when they showed up. However, the duffel bag he came with was not. They never found it through everything. All that ended up happening was I was able to move out without having to pay the fee for breaking the lease. Him showing up randomly, being creepy, or even inviting himself in wasn't enough to do anything. I, of course, took the deal, moving out right away. But in the back of my mind, I know he's out there, probably doing whatever he was going to do to me to someone else, and there's nothing I can do about it.